Like you said, I'm Drew. I'm a product manager at Kongregate, and so today I'm going to talk to you about 3 different idle games that we've published and how they've designed effective limited time events. So for those of you who haven't heard of us, Kongregate is a couple different things. So we started out more than a decade ago as an open games platform on web. About 5 years ago, we got into mobile free-to-play publishing. We've published a couple dozen games in the last 5 years. We recently announced a $10 million fund dedicated to publishing premium titles. We've published 4 to date and have a couple more on the way. So we've been pretty deeply into the idle game space for a number of years, ever since Adventure Capitalist got uploaded to Kongregate Web. So a lot of our success on mobile has been taking games from web and porting them over. So in 2015, we took AdCap from web to mobile. In 2016, we took Crusaders of the Lost Idols from web to mobile. We published Pocket Politics. In 2017, we took Realm Grinder from web to mobile. We published Office Space and Adventure Capitalist sequel, Adventure Communist. So before we get sort of too into the nitty-gritty of idle game event design, some overview on the genre. The 3 big hallmarks are offline progression, exponential growth, and reset mechanics. So these are sort of the classic games where you take a number and you make it go up. This is a slide from my colleague Tammy Levy's GDC talk last year that goes through key performance indicators from the Kongregate portfolio. And as you can see, idle games have really strong retention, some of the best of any genre that we have, but relatively weak player lifetime values. And so this makes limited time events not just important, but really essential, because your core content isn't necessarily going to get you to marketing profitability. You're not going to be able to scale your game. And so what you do with sort of the long tail of your player life is going to have a lot of impact. And so it's important to understand what people are really after when they're playing your games. And so I took this slide from a GDC talk I really enjoyed last year. Quantic Foundry ran a survey, and their founder, Nick Yee, presented it. And basically, it talks about different player motivations and tries to sort of lump them together to help people understand what players want when they're playing games. This section talks about how people who want to collect things often sort of share a desire to accumulate a bunch of power. So I'm sure everyone here knows people who really like 100%ing games. They want to finish all the quests. They want to collect all the ultimate weapons, get all the endings, romance all the characters. That's your completion motivation. And then power is pretty simple. Idle games do that better than pretty much any other genre in terms of just giving you this constant scale of power going up and up and up. But where idle games can sort of diverge in really interesting ways is where they start touching on other motivations. So like I said, I'm going to talk to you about 3 games today. The first one is Adventure Capitalist. I'm going to talk to you about how their events get designed as these sort of puzzles that people have to work their way through, make these important strategic decisions on a really compressed time frame, and how that can be very appealing to people who like solving those kinds of puzzles. I'm going to talk to you about Pocket Politics and how they took idle games, a pretty conventionally single-player experience, and made them competitive. They added leaderboards to their events. Simple, but pretty effective. And then finally, I'm going to talk to you about Office Space and how they put a character system into their game and put a bunch of different interactions that players have to sort of figure out and discover and work their way through as they build a collection to really inflect outcomes, and how their events serve as shifting context for people to explore different parts of their collection and force people to put the puzzle together in different ways. So starting off with our first game, one of the bigger titles that we've published on Idle, Adventure Capitalist. So this was put on mobile in early 2015, developed by a really talented team up in Kelowna, British Columbia, Hyper Hippo. And this is a game that has grown a lot since it launched in 2015. It actually had its best year ever on the marketplace in 2017. It hit top 5 in the US App Store, and a lot of that is attributable to their event performance. So this is the core loop of AdCap. You're here at an Idle Games event talk, so I shouldn't have to walk you through sort of the basic core loop of Idle Games too much, but basically you tap on stuff, you get money, you buy things that tap on stuff for you, you get a bunch of different multipliers, some of them you buy, some of them you earn, and then you reset your game, you destroy all of your stuff, and you get multipliers that let you go faster. So the really big hallmark of AdCap and why it's so great is its unlock system. So this is a system where every time you get a certain amount of a given investment, you get a multiplier. And the genius of the system is that not all of the multipliers correspond to what you're buying. So you get 50 of one thing, but it doubles the output of a completely separate thing. And so now you have to understand where your money is coming from, how powerful this multiplier is in an objective sense, what your game state is going to look like after you get this multiplier, and figure out where you're going to be investing your money. And so the gameplay is simple, but the strategy is actually quite deep. And so in the core game, that's pretty leisurely. You get to sort of progress through that however fast you want. In events, as soon as you add boundaries to this optimization problem, a lot of things change. You have to solve a different puzzle, right? These limited time events aren't the core game. They're a completely separate economy. And so you have to solve this different puzzle of unlocks and progress through it with a limited amount of time. You get the timer at the very top that tells you how much time you have left, and you get to decide whether or not you want to spend or watch ads based on that pressure that gets exerted. And that's very different from the core game. And so to illustrate that a bit, I'm going to show you what people spend their hard currency on in the core game versus in events. And you'll see a bit of behavior shift. So there's a pretty simple economy in adventure capitalists. People buy hard currency and then spend it on a couple different in-game objects. And the thing that they buy mostly is permanent multipliers, so things that amplify the value of your monetary outputs from your investments. And then another 20% of it comes from these pure consumables, right? You jump forward a couple hours or days or weeks, and those are called time warps. When it comes to events, though, time warps take up a much greater share of what people are spending on because of the time constraint, because people aren't necessarily as interested in investing. They're interested in making it to the end as fast as they can, or at least before time runs out. And so multipliers go down as a share, time warps go up as a share. And so this doesn't really matter unless I can show you that we actually change players' spending habits as a result of that, which, in fact, we do. So we run weekly events nowadays, and this is a chart of our average revenue per daily active user over the last 3 months. And as you can see, at the end of every event, ARPDAU spikes to about double what the baseline is, as players want to complete events and finish the puzzle because they played inefficiently, they didn't play enough, whatever the reason, this event cadence successfully drives increased purchases. In-app purchase revenue isn't everything, though, especially not with idle games. So with idle games, we've seen that half or more of revenue that comes from the game is ad-supported rather than in-app purchases. And so for AdCap in particular, that ratio is actually more than 70% skewed towards ads. And so most of that revenue comes from rewarded video, which is 15 to 30-second ads that people choose to watch in exchange for rewards. And AdCap has one really good original ad implementation that has driven a lot of success over its life. And that is, you watch an ad, you get a multiplier that doubles your output for 4 hours. And from what you just saw, half of what people spend on in the core game is multipliers, so people obviously find multipliers appealing. And the value of it and why people watch so many ads, drive so much ad revenue, is because the team made it that that ad unit stackable. So you can watch 6 of them in a row, and you get 24 consecutive hours of doubled profits. And so when you put that in events, you have a completely different space where people need to watch ads in order to progress faster. You end up with people willing to watch more ads during events. And so we've seen regular 30% uplifts on people watching ads, sort of per person watching ads. So sort of bringing all of that together, AdCap creates these time-limited puzzles where people have to make complex optimization decisions based on an unlock system that shifts context around what it's smart to buy, and then leverages a pretty classic time constraint to motivate people to spend and watch ads more. So moving on, the next game I want to talk about is Pocket Politics. Pocket Politics is an idle game made by one of our first-party studios, Ultrabit, down in San Diego. And Pocket Politics did something pretty basic but very effective in taking idle games, a pretty typically first single-player experience, and making them into something more social and more competitive. So at first blush, Pocket Politics doesn't look too different from AdCap. You still have all of these progress bars that look very similar. You have this big number at the top that tells you that you really care about that thing. What's different is when you go over and you see its leveling system. This is where your core aspiration really comes in. So you get money, you fill up this bar, you tap on it, you level up, and you go from John Q. Public to President of the United States. And the mechanic of needing to tap to level is really small but very effective because it creates a number of constraints that force people to engage more and ultimately spend more. So when you sort of hit your cap, right, when you're ready to elect, you have to tap on it. If you happen to be away from the game at that point, every dollar you're earning isn't going towards your next level. So you're not completing that aspiration. You're gaining money, but you're not making progress in that same way. And so what we see with events is people end up playing more during the events, having longer sessions because they don't want to have that sense of loss of being away and having that money that they're earning wasted. And so we see those lifts. It also impacts how people engage with time warps, right? So time warps exist in Pocket Politics as well as AdCap. With a time warp, you buy a couple hours or days or weeks of progress, but you're never going to be able to tap to level up in the middle of your time warp. And so if you want to buy multiple levels of progress, you have to buy at least that many time warps, which is very effective. It also lets you put leaderboards in your events by leveraging a pretty intuitive leveling system, right? I'm level 20, you're level 30, you're higher than me, I get to decide whether or not I want to chase you up the leaderboard. And so when we implemented leaderboards into events, we actually saw something really fascinating, which was version 1 of leaderboards didn't have rewards on it. It was just a list of who's doing best in the events, what their level is. And just from that, we saw a 25 to 30% ARPDAU increase, just from people who wanted to compete with each other. And then a month later, we added rewards to those leaderboards and saw an additional bump in revenue as people were now competing for something. They had rewards that they were chasing. And so we understand that as competition being an intrinsic motivator and obviously rewards being an extrinsic motivator, and both of those being effective. So in conclusion, leaderboards are good. Letting people compete in your events works even in a pretty conventionally single-player genre, and competition works both as a way to motivate people who just want to win, as well as structuring your game in a way that ties limited time events into your core content. So moving on to the last game that I'm talking about for today, Office Space, we have also made by Ultrabit. They saw that the reward system in Pocket Politics wasn't necessarily all that it could be. And so they took that and iterated on it in a couple different ways. So Office Space launched in April 2017 and hit top 25 on iOS and top 5 on Google during its launch weekend. And so the big difference here is with the addition of a classic film IP, it adds characters, pretty resonant, recognizable characters. It maintains the same leveling mechanics. It still has events that are designed in very similar ways. But the addition of characters really bites off a lot of themes from other genres. So you have rarity and upgradability. These characters act as floor multipliers where people are constantly choosing where to put them, how to arrange them, which ones to use. And so you have, in the screenshot, 11 different characters impacting this middle floor. And those kinds of setups and those kinds of creative deployments are what Office Space asks players to do by engaging with its character system and making those kinds of choices. And that really leans into this sense of discovery that players can have, where you have a collection and you're trying to figure out how things synergize with each other the best, how to create the biggest effect. And so this is very similar to Adventure Capitalist. There's a lot of overlap in terms of the design space between AdCap's unlocks and Office Space's characters, right? Both of them have impacts on a range of investments. Both of them ask you to understand how you're supposed to invest in your board differently depending on different contexts. And both of them add a little bit of humor. For those of you who've played AdCap, you no doubt have noticed the puns and the references and all of that. And Office Space uses character abilities as a nice way to add a little bit of flavor. Some characters want to be in the basement, some of them want to be in the boardroom. So the big difference is Office Space has a much greater degree of player freedom over how that system works, right? You arrange the characters, you choose which ones you put where, how they interact. With AdCap, you have to solve that system, but that's what you're doing. You don't choose how that system is built. The game's economy designer does that, and the best that you can do is solve it as fast as you can. So in terms of events, Office Space uses those a little bit differently than Pocket Politics and AdCap. Rather than trying to spike revenue by getting people to pay through events, the goal of events is to push people to see their collection differently, creating different contexts so that people have to use narrow subsets of their characters. Here you can see there's a holiday event where you can only use holiday characters level 5 or greater. So you can't use the same strategy you use in the main game. You have to come up with something different. If you want to do better in the event, you have to buy characters that are at that level or better. And then in terms of leaderboards, of course, when you want a better, bigger collection, you realize that you have to play these events over and over, place well on the leaderboards, and get character gacha pulls that give you a better collection to take into your next event. And by having a character collection that builds and sustains over time, you're not just trying to get people to buy multipliers every event. You're actually asking them to build a collection that will make the next time that they play an event that much better for them. And so the aspiration is longer term and interacts with both the core game and the LTEs. And so the question, of course, becomes, does this work? Answer, yes, it does. What gets inflected as a result of this character system is not necessarily really hard events. It's the release of characters that people find really desirable and that give them better, more powerful, broader options. And so over the holidays, we saw a 100% increase in ARPDAU as we released a new rarity of character. So in conclusion, the character system allows the game designers to use events to create different contexts for people to understand the value of their collection and see the value in expanding it, and gives players this self-directed strategic access for making decisions rather than simply trying to solve a problem that the game designers are putting in front of them. So wrapping all of that up, I'll take questions in a sec, but to sort of recap everything, the core motivator for many idle games, really all idle games, is this concept of collection and power accumulation. And the way that idle games do that is particularly potent, right? Instead of counting 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 traditional RPG leveling style, idle games count 1,000, a million, a billion, a trillion. And so what seems like an insurmountable problem at first, you breeze by trivially as soon as you get enough multipliers to really propel yourself beyond those obstacles, and that feels great. And then in terms of how specific games implement events to leverage those motivators, AdCap uses puzzles through its unlock system to get people to consider where they're getting their money from, what's going to change when they hit their next unlock, and make those strategic decisions under time pressure so that when they play too inefficiently or they don't play enough, they have the ability to pay through the event and get to the end if they want to. Pocket Politics uses a pretty classic leaderboard system, and again, to really drive this point home, there is the intrinsic part of leaderboards where we've seen real revenue growth from people who just want to compete, just want to win. And we've seen additional growth from people who want to win leaderboards because they want those extrinsic rewards. They want the things that will make them more powerful in the rest of the game. And then finally, Office Space gives people a system that allows them to express themselves and discover interactions. And this touches on something pretty near and dear to my heart. I come from a collectible card game background, and I love Magic the Gathering. And so in many ways, Office Space hits on the same sort of motivators as Magic does for deck building, right? You have a collection, you have a set of cards, and you have to discover interactions within that let you create the most powerful strategy that you can. You see the value in what your strategy is doing, and you see that there are better options out there, and so you spend money because that has value to you as a way of gaining access to these better strategies. And by building that system that lets people really express themselves and experiment, Office Space does what many other genres have already figured out, which is that creating character systems, RPG-style systems, and discovery-driven systems works and gets people to spend a lot of money. And it uses those events as a way to tie the motivation for collecting more characters into the broader game, rather than simply creating these spikes every week as you try and speed your way through an event. So all of those are different ways of understanding how to blend events into the core game of your idle design, and all of them have been effective and validated in various contexts. So that's all I've got for you, and I'm happy to take any questions that you have.
Hi. I'm wondering, you introduced quite a bit of different live op features, and I'm wondering, can you give a sense of like how long of like dev development you guys did, and then if you guys did anything like any test prototypes before you went out? Because I imagine like building a whole character system is really expensive from the get-go, and then leaderboards and rewards, and then even the like limited time events. So I guess through that process, and then is there anything like, like for me to say, oh, well, let's build a character system, and then it's going to take like 3 months, and then, by then maybe my game's dead. So
right.
How do you prove it out?
Right. And so the question is, can I speak a little bit to the production costs of different components of limited time events? And so that's going to vary a lot by team, right? You have, for adventure capitalist events, there's a good number of art assets that go into that, and just the fidelity of their humor is really important. They actually, I spent a good amount of time with them over the last year. Their whole studio gets into writing those little jokes, references, and puns and bits of humor that make their events feel sort of alive. So the extent to which you should put a character system into your limited time events is sort of directly in relation to whether or not you want a character system to underpin your core game, because it is that size of feature. There are smaller cost features, right? The extent to which you build a separate event that's a menu that has a different economic puzzle to it is probably the lowest cost thing that you can do. And AdCap shows that there's good gains to be made just from giving people a small puzzle that you give them 4 days to a week to work their way through. And that requires tweaking numbers in a spreadsheet, creating as many assets or as few assets as you want, some strings, some localization, all of that. And then leaderboards, I can't speak directly to how long it takes to create that technology, but I suppose that depends on your engineers and what you've got available.
Thank you very much.